Hello everybody, it's the Game Judge here, and I know we just received some new info about Avowed from the Xbox Developer Direct a few days ago. However, they did release some pre-recorded footage where they did a sit-down talk on the Xbox podcast, where the devs actually gave us some deeper details about some elements in Avowed, which is good because, to be honest, after watching the Xbox Developer Direct and seeing what they told us about Avowed, it kind of left a lot to be desired. At least that's how I felt about it anyway. And I think one of the biggest questions that people had about Avowed after watching what they had at the Xbox Developer Direct is how exactly does the character progression system work? And up to this point, they hadn't really given us a lot of information about this area. And thankfully, in this sit-down talk with the Xbox podcast, the developers did give us a little more info about the character progression system. They actually confirmed that there is going to be a skill tree.
So there is a skill tree in this game?
Yes.
Yes, there is.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I love a good skill tree, so
yes.
it's good to confirm that.
So there you have it. At least we know there's a skill tree in Avowed. He then goes on to explain a little more about the design philosophy when it comes to the skill tree and the classes in Avowed, and this part is pretty interesting.
One of the things we've done in terms of skills in the tree is we've tried to, pillars as classes, right?
Now, this is interesting because this kind of gives us a look into what their design philosophy is going to be for the skill tree in Avowed, perhaps, because he's talking about PoE here and how they did classes, and I have to imagine they're going to draw some inspiration from PoE and perhaps take some of those elements that they used in PoE and then add that to Avowed, but maybe make it a little different.
We wanted to be able to grab as many abilities from the trees as possible and sort of categorize them a little bit differently so that the player doesn't feel like they're locked into a single choice at the start of the game.
Flexibility.
They can kind of mix and match, between different abilities, so you can get some you can
Variety.
you have
So
some
that
variety.
means no
You can choose to
classes.
kind of commit to being a fighter, right, per se, but it's not an enforced kind of class setup.
Couple things I want to go over here. First, he mentioned classes from Pillars of Eternity. If you don't know what Pillars of Eternity is, it's a game that was developed by Obsidian Entertainment, and it's actually the universe that Avowed is going to be taking place in. And it was released a while ago, and there's a Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. So he mentioned PoE when he was talking about classes when it comes to Avowed. And just in case you guys don't know what that is, here's a little bit of info going over that.
Used during character creation or when a companion first joins your party. During character
See,
creation,
this is what I was
you
talking
select the
about. So
first
these are the
class,
classes
subclass,
that they
and
had in
active
PoE,
ability as you would for a
and I
single-class
think
character.
Obsidian is going to get
Subclasses
away
are
from
designed
this
to
with
offer
Avowed.
meaningful
It's
trade-offs
going to be more of
compared
a
to the base
freestyle
class.
system.
Though
They even
some
had
subclasses
multi-class
change
in
the
PoE.
classes. During character creation, and each time you level up, you can view the ability tree for your class or classes.
So I think this is interesting to look at because they specifically mentioned PoE when it comes to kind of the classes and the skills. And you can see you have your class here and how it branches. And this is like your typical skill tree, I would say, that you see like in fantasy RPGs. And it looks like they're going to be going away from this. So you won't be locked into being a rogue where you have this specific skill tree. I imagine it's going to be something like you could bounce around from different abilities. Kind of like if you ever played Skyrim, how you can just branch into two-hand or use spells. You're not really locked into one particular skill set. Now that we know Obsidian is moving away from a class system and moving into a system where they're kind of prioritizing flexibility and the ability for a character to change their abilities or skills fairly easily, which is made obvious by the fact that they're constantly mentioning flexibility and respec in this interview they did with the Xbox podcast.
Very flexible.
So we developed a flexible combat system.
Respecing.
And as Carrie said, you can respec if you don't like
exactly.
the direction
Yeah.
you went down.
I get it, Avowed is flexible. This kind of reminds me of the direction that Bethesda went with Skyrim, where you kind of had a class system where you kind of did whatever you want. You weren't really locked into a particular class. Like you didn't really choose like a mage or a paladin. And this was different than games they had in the past, like Oblivion or Morrowind. And this spurred some controversy in the Elder Scrolls community because people felt like Bethesda was dumbing down the game with Skyrim. However, it worked out really well for them because Skyrim was a huge success with mainstream appeal, which unfortunately led to them re-releasing Skyrim way too many times. The reason I say this is because I think Obsidian Entertainment might be trying to do this exact same thing, which is create a game that has a little mainstream appeal like Skyrim did. And I think this could cause potentially some of that same division that we saw with people in the Elder Scrolls community in regards to things like the skills and class system, because it does appear that they're removing or reworking some of those elements from the systems that they had in PoE. This may allow them to reach a wider audience, but they may poke the beehive of the more hardcore gamers. Me personally, I have mixed emotions about this, and I think about this a lot when it comes to these kinds of games. That is, when you make things too flexible or too easy to change, such as the abilities or the skill tree, then it removes that sense of permanence when making decisions about the game, like your character stats or classes. So this to me almost gives you the illusion of choice when it comes to skills or classes. However, on the flip side, having the flexibility to change things can make it easier to experiment and to find more fun ways to play the game. I think this is really important for the casual gamer because it can be more convenient and save time for the casual gamer who maybe doesn't have the time or want to put the effort into making a whole new character. Like, let's say we have this person who makes a sorcerer, for example, and level them up to, let's say, level 20. Then they realize they don't like it. Well, then they have to start a new character and level them up. So a lot of this, I think, boils down to the individual and the audience Obsidian Entertainment is trying to appeal to with Avowed. I think having a respec option can be a good thing, but I think it needs to be balanced to where it's not something that's not too easy to do that turns off the more hardcore crowd, or too hard to do that it turns off the more casual crowd. What do you guys think about this design dilemma when it comes to RPGs like this, in particular Avowed? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. Another area I've been really curious about when it comes to Avowed is the companions. They've been pretty vague on details when it comes to this recently, but thankfully they did give us a little more info about this area in the sit-down interview with the Xbox podcast. We already know about the companion Kai existing, but they also confirmed that another companion option, Giada,
character, but they're not the solo character we see in this conversation, Giada and Kai.
And one of the things they mentioned that I liked the most is that it seems like your companions will potentially be fleshed out and have interesting backstories.
You know, your companions are your traveling partners in your journey through the Living Lands. They all have deep ties to different regions of the Living Lands, and they all have their own personal reasons for wanting to ally with the player and help them resolve the big conflicts that you're encountering over the course of the game. So they're your allies, in some ways your advisors, your local guides, and they provide a lot of additional commentary and context that reveals something both about their character and...
So I like what I'm hearing here, and one of my favorite party systems actually is the Dragon Age series. I always felt like they had a really cool system in place where the companions would kind of have banter and deep backstories. I kind of hope that Obsidian with Avowed, they have kind of some of these elements in there, right? Like maybe when you put Kai in your party and Giada, they banter, and if you mix and match like with other companions in the game, potentially that would change the banter. It'll be interesting to see what direction they go in this regard. Another thing that gets me excited about Avowed is they mentioned that Avowed will have more companions outside of Kai and Giada.
Should we assume there will be other companions throughout the game as well?
Yes, you'll meet a couple more. Kai and Giada are just two of them.
It's interesting too because while they didn't say how many companions you could have traveling with you at once, it seems like from the footage that you can at least travel with two because you can see Kai and Giada fighting with you in the gameplay footage. And they show Giada as a healer and Kai as more of a tank.
And Giada is healing, right? And so Kai's kind of your tank. He has an ability that's called Taunt.
Although I wish they would have shown some of the companions using their abilities, like maybe showing Kai use the Taunt ability that he mentioned, or maybe show what the healing spell looks like with Giada. Instead, we just kind of got footage of them just like swinging their weapons at the monsters. I would have liked to see a little more here. Since it seems Avowed is going for a more linear approach, I would think it's probably more of a set role for your companions, and I'm okay with that if the trade-off is worth it. I'll be honest, here's what I liked about Avowed based off what I've seen so far. I like the combat versatility and the variety, the focus on a linear story with choices and consequences that impact the world, and the companions. Where I have my concerns and questions though is the whimsical art style and the impact of your combat and your weapons, and the character progression potentially lacking that permanence feeling. So I think a lot of this is going to depend on how they balance those elements. I know the footage they showed us is from the alpha gameplay footage, so maybe they'll have some time to refine some of these things. I'm curious, what do you guys like or dislike about Avowed, based off what we've seen so far? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.